Mainstream awareness defines forgiveness in four different ways: pardoning, having compassion for others, ceasing anger, and letting go. So I feel that those four things can feel impossible. Like, what do you mean that's the answer to my healing? Like, that feels impossible. And that was where I was at. I was called to forgive, and it felt impossible to me. So I actually had the intuition to get under forgiveness's hood and examine its infrastructure. And when I was through the tunnel of having this experience, I came out the other side and I was completely wowed by forgiveness. I was like, whoa, that is potent. Like, that really worked. And my second thought was, and that wasn't pardoning. Why does everybody say that forgiveness is pardoning? And my realization then was that if you actually get under those mainstream definitions, that pardoning, having compassion, ceasing anger, and letting go are actually all the potential outcomes of how I define forgiveness. They're not the act of forgiveness.
Welcome to Linda's Corner, where we bring more hope, healing, and happiness to the world. My name is Linda Bjork, and today we're going to be talking about the power of forgiveness. I'm delighted to welcome Dara Mckinley. Dara is an expert on teaching the path of forgiveness. You can reach Dara at her website, daramckinley.com, and I'll include that link in the show notes. Welcome, Dara. I'm so glad that you could join with me today.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited about this conversation, and I'm excited about talking about the concept of forgiveness. And so, as we talk about this, is it okay if even before we get to your story, I would love some clarification? Because this word is actually a trigger for a lot of people. If you've been hurt, if someone has done something to you, and then someone comes up and says, the path to healing is to forgive them. Sometimes they misunderstand that word. So I want to hear what you mean to make sure that you and I are on the same page. So what is it?
I'm having the same question. I want to know what you mean
Right.
when
So
you say
what
the path to
is
healing is
it
to forgive them.
and what isn't it?
Okay, so mainstream awareness defines forgiveness in four different ways: pardoning, having compassion for others, ceasing anger, and letting go. So I feel that when someone has said something very big happen to them, that those four things can feel impossible to the person. Like, truly, they just feel like, what do you mean that's the answer to my healing? Like, that feels impossible. And that was where I was at. I'm not going to get into my story, but that's where I was at in 2012. I was like, I was called to forgive, and it felt impossible to me. So I actually had the intuition to get under forgiveness's hood and examine its infrastructure and examine exactly what is the force that enables those four things to happen. And when I was through the tunnel of having this experience, I came out the other side and I was completely wowed by forgiveness. I was like, whoa, like, that is potent. Like, that really worked. And my second thought was, and that wasn't pardoning. Why does everybody say that forgiveness is pardoning? And my realization then was that if you actually get under those mainstream definitions, that pardoning, having compassion, ceasing anger, and letting go are actually all the potential outcomes of how I define forgiveness. They're not the act of forgiveness. So I'm interested to see how that lands with you.
Fantastic. And it matters that when we use a word, that we mean something similar. I had another guest who was a psychologist and a survivor of horrible, horrible abuse. And he said, I don't teach forgiveness. He says, I think that's just garbage. And as we kind of clarified, I said, okay, fantastic. So what do you teach and what does that word mean to you? And the funny thing is, as he kind of clarifies, he says, well, it's like just letting somebody off the hook and saying, oh, that's okay. And it's not okay. And it doesn't mean, and as he went through, but I do believe in letting go. I do believe. And I said, well, when it comes down to it, what I mean and what you mean are the same thing. And he said, yeah, I can live with what you say when you say the word forgiveness, but I'm just not going to use that word because I don't like it. So just kind of interesting. And when I think personally of the power of forgiveness, there are two incredible women and their stories that come to my mind. And the first one is Corrie ten Boom, who wrote The Hiding Place. And she is a survivor of a Nazi concentration camp. And when she came out of the horrors of the war and the horrors of the concentration camp, she preached forgiveness. She said that the answer to the healing of the individuals who suffered, for their families, for our nation, is forgiveness. And then the other person who comes to my mind is Immaculée Ilibagiza, who is the author of Left to Tell. And she is a survivor of the Rwandan genocide in the 1990s. And she saw horrific just injustices and cruelty and awful things. And her message when she was done is the solution to healing for ourselves, for the victims, for the survivors, for the loved ones, for our nation is forgiveness. And so when I see these beautiful, powerful, amazing women who have gone through unimaginable horrors, they both come up with the answer is forgiveness. And when you look at pictures and images of these women who I think are just beautiful, they just shine. And then you read what happened to them, you think, how can you look like that? That inner light, that peace that radiates, that power, that shining. Mm-hmm. And then you've been through these horrible things. It's almost like a mismatch. And so now we live in a world where there's so much division. And you bring up the idea for healing, for individuals, for families, for our nation is forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about what that is, how it has applied to you and your story. And then your expertise is not just why, but how. And that matters. Because if someone just says the answer is to forgive, and first of all, I don't know what it means. And second of all, I don't know how to do it. I'm stuck. So let's help people get unstuck. Is it okay if we hear your story? Why did this idea of forgiveness become important to you?
Great. Okay. One thing I want to say before I launch into my story is that I am aware of these incredible stories of forgiving horrific atrocities and wars, and that these people do define forgiveness as pardoning. And I believe these people. I believe that that spiritual framework very much works for them, and that they were able to heal using pardoning. I also think that I'm representing the demographic that, for whatever the reason, that definition just doesn't work for. So, but I really want to, because I have so much reverence for the women that you just named and for the so many people who have gone through horrific times and have forgiven. Okay. So with that said, I grew up in a household where my father was atheist and my mother was agnostic. And she came from a Catholic family. She was the youngest of 10. She questioned Catholicism and was reprimanded for it. And so when she brought up my sister and I, she said, I want you to decide what is spiritually true for yourselves. And I was born very spiritual. I was born having a visceral connection to unconditional love. So I had all these Catholic aunts and uncles saying to my mom, you're making a mistake. You need to get her confirmed, you need to get her baptized, you need to do all the things. And as a spiritual little kid listening to this, I was like, if religion can explain to me what this feeling I have is, then I want it. But she refused. She said, no, you will, grow up and be a seeker to yourself. And I now look back on that and I think that that was a really lovely gift that she gave to me. So I ended up studying psychology. I have 2 degrees in psychology. Lots of personal growth. Did 6 year study of Buddhism. So just lots of seeking, working in human services. And I became a geek for healing modalities. So like EMDR and somatic therapies and psychotherapy. And I was fascinated, but I was very much an observer. I wanted to find the ones that really worked. Every time another one was introduced to me, I would examine it, experience it, scrutinize it. Like, does this really relieve the body of heavy burdens? So I was 2 decades into this pursuit when I experienced a huge loss. I had a business idea. I kind of rushed into it with people I didn't really know. We did raise up the business, but our personalities were incompatible. And so we kind of endured the relationship for as long as we could. And it was many years. Like, we definitely hung in there. And then everything fell apart. And there was a huge layer of deceit in how it fell apart. And I lost my side of the business. And so here I am. I have 2 decades of psychology and spirituality behind me. I was relieved that the relationship was finally over on one hand, and on the other hand, it was a huge loss for me. So I was like, okay, I'm a creative person. I have a lot to be grateful for. I have supportive family. I have all these skills. Like, I will, even though this is like an immense loss for me, I will move forward and recreate my life and focus on gratitude and process my emotions and all of that. So I had a friend so 3 years into that, or during over 3 years, I had an old wise woman friend who I would tell the story of what happened to, and she kind of watched the whole thing go down. And she would listen to me say everything I needed to say about it. And then she would always end the conversation with, Dara, you might want to consider forgiveness. And I would get so irritated. I had 2 thoughts. First was, her name was Fran. Fran, did you just hear anything I just said? And then my second thought was, and I had this thing that was so dear to my heart taken from me. And there was something about the word give. It was like, what? There's something else I'm supposed to give here? Like, I don't get it. So, that so her and I had that conversation like 2 or 3 times. So now it's 3 years to the month. And I have not been able to let it go. And I keep having this like looping thought for, it was just that it was so unethical in my view of how the whole thing ended. And I'm an ethical person. I think like people who have a high moral value and are very ethical, when they come up against something that seems unethical to them, it just really bends their brain. So I was in this place where I just like couldn't stand it. I wanted justice, and I felt like a kind of a chronic burning in my body, which could, I would name resentment. So at this 3 year anniversary mark, I'm like, God, I'm still not over this. And I start to slide into a mystery illness that had anxiety, insomnia, and fatigue. And I had a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old depending on me. And the doctors can't figure out what's wrong with me. And I start to get very afraid, and my fear, it starts to exacerbate the symptoms. And so I just start spiraling into this hole. And I'm a very intuitive person who, as I said, I was born with this really lovely spiritual connection. And when I hit rock bottom, I'm not a psychic person, but I have like strong intuition. And this intuition gets incredibly strong when I hit rock bottom. So it's October 2012. I hit rock bottom and I just start speaking to what I call the universe. That's, some people call it God, Allah, whatever you call it. I call it the universe. And I say, look, I am freaked out to my core. You have got to tell me how to get out of this. Whatever you tell me, I will do. Like, I'm just begging you, just please tell me. And the message I got back was to forgive. And just like when my friend Fran would suggest it, I was irritated that this was the message I got back. But the universe doubled down on the message. The message was so strong and kind of unrelenting. And it was very like, hey, Dara, we just told you what to do. Like, go figure it out. So it's 2012. I'm like, okay, I can do anything as long as I have a how to, right? So I was like, I need to get online and I Google how to forgive. I type that in and tons comes up, but it's 90% of it was about why a person should forgive. And then I did find like a forum where there were people saying, but how do you do it? And the responses coming back to them were, you just do it. So I was like, wow, I just did this thing that I've been hearing about, from my earliest days, I just Googled it and there is no how to. So I'm on my own right now. So, okay, Dara, you have 2 years of psychology and spirituality behind you. You can figure this out. And, keep in mind, I'm completely freaked about my health. So I am incredibly motivated to figure this out. And I had the intuition. I said, as I said earlier, it's like, what is the force that's enabling letting go, pardoning, having compassion, and ceasing anger? What I got under forgiveness's hood. I said, okay, let's get down and dirty. What is behind these words that I've been hearing about my entire life? 3 weeks later, I was at peace. My thoughts were serene, my resentment was gone, and I, as a geek for healing modalities, was wowed. I was like, whoa. I was like, this forgiveness thing that I've heard about my entire life is for real. And it's so effective. And my next thought was, and again, this is, my experience coming at the forgiveness realm from a different angle. My next thought was, and that wasn't pardoning. Why does everyone think it's pardoning? And and with that said, forgiveness left me completely neutral to my ex-partners. I had no malice towards them anymore. So in a certain sense, you could say that what I had done enabled pardoning to happen in a very natural way. It was nothing I need to compel myself to do, like, oh, okay, I'll pardon them, even though I don't really want to. It really was just this organic thing. So that's my story.
Wow. Okay. So we're going to have to go back to that 3 week statement, but in a minute. Some of the things that I noticed as you were telling your story is you like things that work, and I do too. And your measurement of how do I know that it works is how does it make me feel? What is the physiological response in my body? And that I think is a beautiful way to measure because we want to measure things. How do I know if it worked? And so checking that out, I thought was interesting. And as you shared your story and you talked about that betrayal and how that just hurt you to your core, it's like, this is wrong. It's wrong. And it hurt me. And it's not okay. And then when a friend comes along and says, forgive, it's like, but it's not okay. I have been wronged. And that idea of, okay, what does this mean? And how do I apply it? It can be offensive. And I think it's actually quite refreshing that you share that. It's like the idea of forgiveness is offensive when we misunderstand what it means and really how to apply it. And then as you shared your story and you got sick, that is so fascinating. And it happens over and over and over again. And I don't know if all of our listeners know this, but according to the CDC, over 90% of our illnesses are actually psychological. They come from stress, they come from our feelings, they come from our emotions, and then it becomes physical. And so when we have things like I'm hurt, whether I have been offended, I have been wronged, those things become a part of us and they manifest physically, which goes right back to your idea. My measurement is going to be, how does this make me feel?
Right. And
Does it
there's
do
something
to my
important I need to
body?
clarify
Oh, yes,
is
please.
that the forgiving did not clear up my illness. Interestingly enough, however, I have had chronic issues because since 2012, I'm now addicted to forgiveness and I forgive all the time, every chance I can. I think it is the coolest, most wonderful thing. I think it's a free drug. It's like, so, and I have used forgiveness to clear up chronic pains that I've had because exactly as you just said, so much that it manifests in our body is actually an emotional burden that hasn't been processed and moved through intended to. And so I don't want to deter anyone because I do think forgiveness has immense benefits to our physical health. I mean, even if it's just, as I said, to relieve an emotional burden is an emotional burden. And who wants to be walking around with a bag of rocks, right? You need to relieve that. And so it didn't clear up my health issue. That was another podcast that you and I can talk about. However, it gave me, I was in a stormy sea and it gave me a lifeboat and it got a bag of rocks off of the lifeboat. And so it kept me afloat during this difficult time. And it kept me a clear channel so I could follow the path of healing.
Excellent. All right. Now, will you share the how to? What did you do during that 3 weeks that made a difference
Okay.
so that you went from being offended to being addicted?
Okay. So I teach a course now on how to do this, and it's a 6-week course. And so I'm definitely going to give you the lay of the land right now for the course. But I also it's in my deepest heart that I want to give people a transformational experience that will be with them for the rest of their lives. Because I feel like the world of forgiveness is very wordy. There's a lot of people saying a lot of words about it. And it's actually it's an embodied experience. It's something that really affects you in a tangible way. And all these words, I think, are kind of keeping people up here. So with that said, I'm going to give you some words about what happened. So I define forgiveness as the ability to apply unconditional love. And to me, unconditional love is very much a spiritual force that us human beings down here in the conditional realm, and the earth realm is conditional, have access to in many different forms. And so it's one's ability to access and apply unconditional love. And the part 2 of my definition, and it's the ability to clearly see and identify what needs it. So in my course, the first thing I teach people is how to embody unconditional love. And as I said, I was born with a very strong feeling, and I know a lot of people are born with a very strong feeling of it. And then there's also people who do not have a constant feeling of unconditional love. However, these people, they can experience it through the unconditional love they have for their families, or the unconditional love they have for their passions, or unconditional love you have for a tree. Whatever it is, unconditional love is pumping through us in some form. And so it's really a matter of becoming aware of what that form is and then recognizing that that's a medicinal force. Whether it's your love for your puppy or your love for yourself or your love for, makeup, whatever it is that you just have this unconditional draw to where it's like, wow, I don't know what it is about this thing, but I would just, I'm devoted to it. I would just do anything for it, from a really authentic place, not from a place of like self-sacrifice or obligation. That's not unconditional love. So it's a matter of identifying how this force is playing out in your life, in the world. And then, acknowledging like, this is something that actually can be used. So the second thing I teach people is how to use it, right? Like how to create a forgiveness scenario where you have the opportunity, now that you've identified this love and can feel it in your own personal firsthand experience, how do you apply it? The third thing I teach people is how to circulate the emotional realm. So I, from my perspective, there's four realms to the human experience: the mental realm, the physical realm, the realm of behavior and action, and the realm of emotions. And I feel like the realm of emotions is kind of the black sheep in the world. Like it has a lot of people saying a lot of things about it, but I just like to get people to see it as a very anatomical system that needs to be tended to and cared for, just like our minds need to be tended to and cared for, just like our physical body needs to be tended to and cared for, just like our behaviors, need to be tended to and cared for. The emotional realm is just a system that needs to be tended to and cared for. And and this is important, when it's not tended to and cared for, it impedes the flow of unconditional love. When you talk to somebody or when my friend Fran would talk to me about forgiveness, I had all these big emotions about what had happened. And so immediately I was like, oh, like I can't do that. But it was me not taking care of my own emotional realm in that moment. So when we get it circulating, which is what it's meant to do, all anatomical systems of the body are meant to move and circulate. If an anatomical system of the body does not move or circulate, it becomes unhealthy. So once it moves and circulate, it makes a lot of space to be able to become receptive to the experience of unconditional love. That's the third thing I teach. The fourth thing I teach is then how to begin identifying what aspects of yourself or what happened. It's very unique to every person. And there's a very clear, non-conceptual recipe of how to identify what it is that you now need to apply this unconditional love to. So all this time while I'm teaching this, people are practicing applying the love over this 6 weeks. So it's like if you want to create a new behavior or a new neural pathway in the brain, you need, 21 to 28 days to do it. So it's really like a boot camp, like a training ground where, again, I'm not just telling people like, oh, just apply unconditional love. I don't want to do words and concepts. You know what I mean? As I said, I Googled how to forgive in 2012. There are thousands of people saying and speaking what forgiveness is. I don't want to add to that crowd. I want to actually be like, okay, people, let's learn about the structure and the practicalities of this so that it is a skill that you have in this world or this lifetime that is going to be full of ups and downs, and that's true for everybody. So, as I said, the final skill, and to me is the most important one, is to identify the parts of the self that need it. And then when people kind of pop out the other side of this experience, and they're able to, do these, do these skills that I teach them, they feel that the anger's gone. They feel peaceful. They, they they're like, they don't have any animosity towards what happened. Or, you always want to hold the external world accountable. You have to, right? Or else humanity's not going to evolve. But it's not about it's not about it's the fierceness of anger and resentment or whatever the emotional world might be doing to, or might be reacting to the loss, has now dissolved. And when it's dissolved, then what I call intuition, what you might call the voice of God, can now come into us and guide us forward in however we're supposed to be guided forward. So that's my ultimate goal, is for people to become a clear channel, a peaceful, clear channel for their intuition or the voice of God. So that was a mouthful, but that's what I teach.
And Dara, isn't it interesting that we are having a podcast? We're having a conversation with words and knowing that words are inadequate to really express and describe a process because healing is not words, it is an experience. Includes action, and you're describing it as a flow, an uninterrupted flow of unconditional love. And it's interesting that thinking about forgiveness, we often think this is about, again, someone else, letting someone else go. That wasn't even part of the equation. It was allowing unconditional love to flow through me and finding the blocks of unconditional love through me, including emotions like my resentment or my anger, and allowing those to dissolve so that the love can flow through. So it is challenging to be able to express those kinds of experiences through words, but we invite any listeners who want to know more, and not just to know more, but to have this experience, then we'll make sure to have your contact information so that they can work with you, so that you can help them through that process if that just feels right. So I do have a question, and that
Yeah.
is, did you say you're very intuitive. Did you come up with this idea, this process on your own then?
Right. That night when I realized I'm someone who needs directions, when I realized the internet wasn't going to give me directions, I said, "Okay, Dara, you need to figure this out and you can do it." And, the first thought that kind of propelled me into what I ended up learning that night, it was actually over the course of 3 days. It was the full moon weekend in October 2012, where Hurricane Sandy was hitting the East Coast. And I was on the West Coast, but it was that very like big dramatic, weekend, because it was like a super full moon that created huge waves on the East Coast. And so it was over the course of the weekend. It didn't happen to me that one night, but that the first step I took was I said, okay, I have been looping in a narrative of how wrong it was what happened to me and how much I wished for justice. So that was the narrative. And I said, okay, so I've been doing that for 3 years. What is the opposite of that? So I like to pose this question to people who are interviewing me. Like, what would you say the opposite of that is?
Gosh, I don't know. Because when you just said you want justice and now you want the opposite, I don't want the opposite of justice. You're talking about mercy? What are we talking
Right,
about?
right. So it was a huge leap. So I I was like, oh, the opposite is to bless this circumstance and and everything about this with unconditional love. And I thought, oh, wow, okay. And it was interesting because that narrative was it had 3 years of momentum, right? So when I finally realized, like, oh, the opposite of listening to this voice in my head is to bless this situation with the highest love. So I said, okay, let me go take that step. And as I stepped towards the highest love, the voice roared, and in objection and said, no, 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 you cannot do that. They effed you over. It really just, and for the first time, as I stood there, I was like, I saw the voice for what it was. It was that I had been embedded with it prior to, this moment. And I thought, oh, wow, like you're trying to protect me, like there's so many like lovely things that you're trying to do right now. But you're actually making me miserable. So I need you to step aside. I've been listening to you for 3 years. I've gotten nowhere. And so I'm going to go do something different. And if this other thing that I'm going to do right now ends up not working out, then you and I can talk again. But for right now, I need you to sit down. I can't listen to you anymore. And so I stepped forward.
A part of that that just fascinates me is the idea of listening to a voice, an inner voice, whatever, where you know you're trying to help me. I mean, let's think if they effed me over. Justice. I mean, that's to help me. I want justice. And you recognize the reality is that it was hurting you and making you miserable. Wow. I think
And
that's
justice isn't a
extremely
bad thing.
powerful.
Justice is great, but uh, it's natural to want it. I wasn't, for me, I very clearly wanted justice, but justice, is a form of like balance. And a lot of people like actively think revenge is the answer to being done wrong.
Right.
But it oftentimes just perpetuates more suffering. It's definitely a rush in the beginning, to be like, ooh, I settled that score and got them back. But did you really just perpetuate more suffering? And, you know, I think that healing is just a more effective path.
I agree. Healing is what we really hopefully want, even more than just revenge. We're hoping that the revenge will heal us and then are very disappointed when it doesn't.
Right. It's a rush in the beginning, but in the long run, it really doesn't give us what we ultimately want, which is a peaceful heart.
Right. Right. Well, this has been amazing. Dara, is there anything you want to make sure we cover before we close?
Well, if you're interested, I have a course information page. It's called howtoforgive.com. That's the very thing I typed in that night in October was how to forgive. And so that's my domain. And I teach the course 4 times a year. And the next one's happening September 15th, and registration closes September 12th. And yeah, there's stuff to learn on my website. If I hope whoever's listening that you found this as a thought provocative conversation, because I know what I have to say definitely can kind of like be a little mind bending at times.
Right.
And that's it.
Thank you. I appreciate very much you visiting with me
Yeah,
today.
thank you, Linda. This was so nice. Thank you so much for having me.
In closing, I'd like to share a quote by Lewis Smedes. He said, "To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that the prisoner was you." Today, I invite our listeners to pursue the freedom that comes through forgiveness. See you next time on Linda's Corner. Thanks for listening. Please share and subscribe to help us reach new listeners. And if you'd like to heal your life from the inside out, there is a free video series at hopeforhealingfoundation.org. Just click on the free stuff tab. I also invite you to grab a copy of one of my books, like Crushed, A Journey Through Depression, and You Got This, an action plan to calm fear, anxiety, worry, and stress. See you next time on Linda's Corner.